Thank you for tuning into Healing Rays. In this video, we respond to a discussion between Glenn Loury and John McWhorter about a Harriet Tubman statue commissioned in Philadelphia that was awarded to a white artist. Loury and McWhorter critique responses from some Black people who say that Black Americans should be the one to tell their own stories.
Is the story of Harriet Tubman only a Black story, or should it be owned by all Americans as American history? Is it possible to tap into a common humanity whereby we can tell each other's stories in an authentic, compelling way? Has enough trust been built with the Black community such that white creatives can tell Black stories through public works of art? And what does it look like for such trust to be built? Let's get to those conversations now. Enjoy.
In viewing that clip, what resonated with you?
So in viewing the clip, what resonated with me are both sides of that tension, right? So you have on one side people saying this is a part of our cultural heritage. It's a part not just of our cultural heritage, but a key figure within the narrative, the story of Black people in America. Which carries with it all sorts of feelings, right? So that's on one side. And so it feels, some words you used were in one of our previous conversations, it feels in bad taste, right? To not appreciate the feelings that members of the Black community would have. That's one side,
And
right?
Americans are no strangers to bad taste.
Yeah, and there's the other side of me that says, that resonates with what Loury and McWhorter said in terms of, is this not something that we actually would appreciate in a previous time? The fact that a white person would step up and create something as a monument to a figure that meant a lot to the Black community for all sorts of reasons, right? So I can understand both of those feelings, and appreciate where they're coming from. I don't know how to resolve the tension between that, but those are things that hit me.
Black people have had these memorials to slavery before, right? And I'm being glib for a reason. So because I watch a lot of documentaries, and I was watching one by this British historian talking about the US Civil War and has it really ever ended? And in one of the segments of her documentary, she featured the memorial statue to Lincoln, not the one at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., but another one in another city that's much smaller. And this is supposed to be, the great communicator, the great whoever, and he's liberated these people. It shows Lincoln standing erect, upright, with one hand raised like this, let's say his left, his hand down like this, his right, in a domed fashion, yeah, over the head of a Black man who's crouching down to him in chains.
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, so this is some memorial to this great liberating and this great liberation. However, you're presenting the people who were very instrumental in fighting for their own freedom. So we weren't just sitting on farms like, okay, when we're going to be free. We were literally out there fighting with white people for our own freedom, fleeing from the South and joining Union troops to free ourselves. We earned our freedom, which is why it incenses me when people say we just sit around and we're not worthy. We get all this special treatment. Nobody sat around and got shit. We earned it. We fought for it. Number one. Number two, when you say white person's going to create a memorial of Harriet Tubman, one has to wonder, and I like alliteration. You'll hear that a lot in my conversation. One has to wonder, is this going to be another Lincoln situation with his hand over a Black man going, ooh, free me, like this? So I understand the group of people that had criticism, feeling that commission should have gone to an African-American artist. I feel there are two conversations at work at here, and one influences the other. The first conversation is one of sentimentality. How do you feel about this non-African American person receiving this commission and doing this statue? And then there's a contextual conversation with respect to art. Because I wonder a few things. Number one, do people know how art is created and how it's analyzed, how critics analyze art? Number one. And number two, do they know how artists, evolve into successful careers? So let's tackle the first one first. So how art is created and analyzed. So, and after having taken our art history course in the Louvre, I have a formal education in this. So you have the subject matter and you have the artist and you have the artist's relationship to that subject matter. And when you look at the acts of Harriet Tubman and what she did, she was literally reminding me a lot of the Holocaust, actually, as I meditated and reflected on this. She was literally smuggling people out of slavery into the land of freedom, coming and going many times. Many times. Not only is that a brave and heroic act, when you think about it, and I thought, and dear friend, I think of you, because that means there are African Americans who are alive today whose ancestors were a part of that smuggling act, whose lineage begat, and they didn't necessarily die as they could have in slavery because Harriet had the courage Miss Tubman had the courage to smuggle them out. There are people, there are literally, all of that is true. So that means there are African Americans today who can trace their existence in Canada, maybe in some of the northern United States, because, wow, my relative was smuggled out through the bravery and their fearlessness and the bravery of Harriet Tubman. And when you look at it in that context, the relationship to the subject, the acts in the life of Harriet Tubman, that's our subject, with vis-a-vis Black people is stronger probably from an African-American artist than it would be from a white artist. So I hear their critique and I hear their sentiment because, number one, because of that alone, when you look at what was done and who it was impacted, and that some African-American people would be the direct beneficiaries of that act. Number two, the career of an artist. Art is all populated and evolves through patronage, right? You need someone to to become your patron, to take up your cause, to champion your work. When you do that, they're doing what? My econ degree, creating a marketplace for your work, especially if you're not picked up by the gallery system. So we all know about the glamorous galleries in New York, all over in the parties and wheelie dealing art. From what I hear, I am not an artist, I work in tech, but I hear it's especially difficult for artists of color, especially Black ones, to get picked up via that system. And this is an amazingly public work who your name is going to be on this and everyone's going to know it. So this is a huge opportunity to grow and evolve and exposure, since I'm looking for people to watch my podcast, as an artist, right? And I just inject humor in the things because it's how I deal with pain.
Yeah.
But as an artist, right? And because of that, I'm like, I hear these people, it would have been great for the commission to be won by an African-American artist, and think of the exposure that would have given them. However, I do hear the counter argument, because we do live in a world we're trying to push toward equality. And you can't necessarily say white folks don't apply, even though that was said to us for years.
Yeah.
And everyone wants to move toward this world of, meritocracy, meaning the best one won out. For me personally, my feeling is I would have liked to have seen it done by a Black artist for all the reasons I've stated before.
Yeah.
However, if you're going to move toward a world of egalitarianism, assuming that the process was egalitarian,
right,
then you have to reconcile that sometimes there will be major works that contribute to an awareness of African-American culture that are not done by African-American people.
Yeah.
But for me, I would want to see the African-American artist get the commission and the interesting things that person would have done given the bravery of the act. I mean, when you read that, because I haven't read the biography, but there's an incredible biography of the life of Harriet Tubman. And she was like the best spy in the US has ever had. The amount of time she came and went. I mean, and them white folks were trying to catch her and she couldn't get her, right? Couldn't get her. Now imagine the sense of pride I feel in that. And now we're talking about me, Andre Tubman. I feel in that here this woman was literally Wonder Woman against this powerful crushing institution. And how many times did she evade capture? And she rescued families and got them to freedom. Now it was up to them to choose what that freedom would look like, etc. That's where she transitioned after that. But she said, this is not right. And I will not stand for what is not right. And she literally put her life in harm's way so that now generations of those people who were rescued, who escaped, can now live and thrive in whatever lives that they're doing right now.
Yeah. 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 So I can understand and empathize with that.
Same way your grandfather thrived when he had children and my dear friend Todd was born. All of that and I told you this before, and I really want you to get this because I really understand what Hitler was going after. He was trying to literally eradicate the planet of Jews so that they literally would not or barely exist anymore. That means the whole point was that so that you wouldn't be born. The whole point of some of this stuff is so that maybe I wouldn't be born. Or if I were born, I would be born into such crushing institution that I had no agency. And because of these brave people, the people in your grandfather's life, in American slavery context, this talk of Harriet Tubman, we are privileged to exist.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I relate to all that, Andre. I relate to all of it. Let me share the less personal first, because it's because I just want to do a quick agreement with the idea of the process, right? And I want to relate it to context. So you said, you gave the example of this Abraham Lincoln memorial that lacked context, right? I know. Yeah. No, I mean, I think I might have seen it.
The black man is like this. So Lincoln's hand is over him and the black man is like this looking up.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if the process of creating that memorial at the very least had Black voices.
No Black voices advocated for a diminutive position like that.
No. That's not what I'm saying, Andre. Listen, hear me out. If in the choosing of what the memorial was going to be or how it was going to look, there were Black voices being consulted, you have to imagine that such a monument was not created, right? Mm-hmm. That was created without context. And even if, full stop, that was created without context. And at the very least, having people who could provide context there in informing what a memorial could and should look like is important. And of course, the larger piece that you're saying is someone who had the experience of being liberated would have a closer relationship to what was shared, and therefore is more likely to be attentive, attuned to context. So I hear all that. So bringing that to process should allow for clear context to inform the decision. I'm on 100% agreement. I don't know what the process was in Philadelphia, but I am 100% agreement around that. And what I'll say is in kind of the more personal vein, and this gets to one of the larger questions that Glenn Loury and John McWhorter raised is the story of Harriet Tubman only Black history?
But here, no, it's American history, but we were the beneficiaries of it.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not.
That's what I mean by the family.
I'm just raising their question and
raise it, baby, because I have an answer for it.
Yeah. So it is American history, but there's a particular strong relationship which you shared.
She wasn't liberating white folks; she was liberating us.
Yeah, and I hear that. And the thing is, that monument is going to send messages through time, right? Not to just present day folks. It's going to send messages through time, and not to just Black people. It will send to Black people, which is why context is important, but it'll also send to other people. Let me share some personal, a conversation we had in the past that relates, as well as some personal relationship. Landon, in sharing his story of how he learned about history generally and about Black history, talked about these biographies that he read. And the way that he talked about Harriet Tubman in particular, he talked about Jackie Robinson, he talked about others. You could just see that the story of Harriet Tubman in particular made a profound impact on him, that was something that resonated deeply with him. I say this because he's never going to have the relationship to Harriet Tubman that Black people have, because he was never the beneficiary in the same intimate way, based on a deeply troubled and painful history.
And I get all that. There are tons of people I've admired through history that have zero to do with African-American culture.
I'm just sharing that there is going to be a relationship.
I held a memorial for Queen Elizabeth II when she died. This Black man held a memorial. When the Queen died, all of my friends started texting me, Andre, are you okay? I said, I'm okay.
Yeah.
Because I love their queen. I am not a British citizen, no way connected to that country. But yeah. I admire what Her Majesty tried to navigate. I say all this to say is I understand the argument you're bringing using Landon as the example.
Yeah, and let me be even stronger and more intimate about that. I don't know if you know this about my grandmother. When she was put into work camps in her local town, first of all, they obliterated her and others' families, and then they were put to work. Mm-hmm. And she happened to strike up a relationship. I don't mean an intimate relationship. I mean, a friendship or relationship with some of the guards. Some of the guards took a liking to her, mm-hmm. and they offered her a way out to escape. And she had formed a relationship, or at least, well, I'm assuming she had a relationship, but also developed a fondness for a mother-daughter, mm-hmm. maybe because she lost her mother, right? And she yearned for that and saw this relationship still there and having a future. She told the guards she wouldn't go unless they went with her. Mm-hmm. She put, not in the same way that Harriet Tubman did, but put her life at stake, mm-hmm. for the rescue of another Jewish family. In this case, mother. When she escaped, which was a troubled escape, so they connected her and this mother and daughter with people on, I'm assuming, a wagon, and they were going to some town that was a safe haven. They at some point got off the wagon because they said it was a bathroom break, and they just took all of their stuff. Now, I don't know if the guards were in on that, or if it was just the guards who the drivers who tricked the guards.
They were left in the wilderness alone.
They were left in the middle of nowhere with none of their stuff. None of their stuff. They somehow made their way to this town, and she went searching everywhere, mm-hmm. for anything that got stolen. And the only thing she could find, you could imagine the feeling that she had, that she expressed when she shared this with me, or even the moment itself, was the one picture that she had of her mother and father, mm-hmm. which was probably the most important thing in there, right? Mm-hmm. Talk about symbols, right? There happened to be a kind of underground railroad that was started in that town, where mm-hmm. they would send people like my grandmother, and she became part of it, mm-hmm. with a little piece of paper that was the ticket for another family who was in mm-hmm. a town that mm-hmm. was under threat of the Nazis coming to liquidate. And so people from this town would go to a town, give this ticket, take the family, and bring them to this town where she also escaped to. And she did that. And I can tell you more about the story there and the dangers and whatnot. This is all to say that I particularly feel a strong relationship to a story like a Harriet Tubman, right? Because it connects me to my grandmother's story and to my grandmother's own courage, right? I'm just bringing.
Would you trust a non-Jew to tell your grandmother's story?
Like, and I was about to say that.
I guess I couldn't say. I was about to say, if I made a movie of your grandparents' life, you would trust me with that. This is a broad friendship. Yeah. But because I did not know that about your grandmother. Thank you for sharing it. It's incredibly apropos. And so my question is, like, would you trust someone who was not a direct beneficiary to tell that story? Because as Black people, we don't necessarily have that trust. And when have white people ever worked to build that trust with us where we could hand it off to? So no, my heart is incredibly closed to this concept. It really is.
And I guess mine is just more open. If I saw, and this is again where process, I guess, matters. If I saw that there was some creation of, let's say, my grandmother's story, I would just be happy that it was out there. If it was done in a way that was compelling and true to form, Let me give you a couple
I think
examples.
we should write a screenplay about your grandmother. Like
I
that's a movie in and of itself that people
my
need to
grandmother was, I mean, both my grandparents were married. My grandmother, I mean, this is a little more in the area of love, but after she met my grandfather, who was selling
Where
things,
did they meet?
they met in the Ukraine, which was not the Ukraine at that time, but that's what
yeah.
So my grandfather was selling on the black market because he couldn't do anything else, right? So he's selling like soap and things like that. One of the towns where he sold was my grandmother's town, and that's how they met each other. They were introduced, they met each other, fell in love. My grandfather was put in prison because of selling on the black market. And he tells this story of coming to my grandmother's town, and where my grandmother lived, they were like, he was going to see her, and it was surrounded by people who were ready to put him in jail.
Oh, wow.
So he gets put in jail. I don't know how she got this job, decides that she's going to go sweep the floors in the prison so that she could see my grandfather and sneak him food so that he doesn't starve in there. So she goes, takes bread, whatever, sneaks some food, doing the sweeping. And at some point, I guess that got old.
Your mother knows this about her parents?
She's the one, she told me this story.
Your Miss Myra told you.
Yeah. No, I
this
told
is an incredible thing to hear.
Yeah. So she, at some point, advocates to the guards for them to let go of to let my grandfather out.
Early release.
And they say no. And she says, then put me in there with him. And they said, we'll let him out. Right?
Your grandmother was ride or die. She was ride or die.
She was. So anyway,
Mr. Moisha.
So my point is, like,
it's okay, Todd. You can let the tears come.
I'm never going to have the relationship that you have to Harriet Tubman, right? Landon is never going to have the relationship you have, or probably not the relationship I have, because I at least have an analogous story. Now, maybe he does. I don't know what his story is. But the point is, and the point I think that Glenn Loury and John McWhorter are trying to make is, can't we touch into a common humanity? Is that possible to touch into a common humanity and appreciate that? And let me give you some examples, because I was really pondering this heavily, and I started to think, what are the things that made a difference to me in thinking about racial relationships? One of them is in the America context, and one of them is outside the American context. So one of them, I think I've shared with you before, one of my favorite movies is Remember the Titans, right? I don't know if you've seen the movie, but the basic storyline of the movie is forced integration in the South. It's a true story, by the way. Forced integration in the South. This previously white football team with previously white coach, okay, has to be integrated as part of the integration. So you have the white players and the black players, plus they get a black coach and a white assistant coach who was one of the previous coaches. Yeah. And so this black coach comes in, he's got to coach this now the integrated team that was forced to be integrated. And it's the story of the conflicts that they had in that integration, but the breakthroughs they also had. It's a powerful story. Like, I mean, really powerful story. And I every time I see it, I get brought to tears. There's this moment where, I think the coach's name is Herman Boone. He decides they're going to go do, a boot camp, or whatever they call football camp prior to the season, somewhere totally like not around their town. They're going elsewhere. So it's just them having to, bond with one another, and they're still fighting it out. Right. And there's a white captain and a black captain, or at least a white leader and a black leader. I can't remember if they were chosen as captains yet. And Herman Boone forces them to get to know each other. He forces them all to have their at least 15-minute conversation, right? To get to know each other. And at some point, these captains have to get to know each other. And they they yell it out, right? You're not, holding the white people accountable. You're not doing that. They're yelling at each other about the ways that they each have fallen short. Well, the next practice, what happens is, one of the things that got brought up by the black captain was, you let that white offensive lineman, you let him, or whoever it was, you let him slide every time. He's letting people through to, the running back was black, to tackle him, to hit him up. He's letting them through, and you do nothing. So in the next practice, the white captain decks that white player, like just decks him, right? And there's this like moment of pause, right? And he goes over, or maybe the black captain comes over and says, strong side, weak side, or whatever whatever words they use in football. And they have this moment of bonding where he then, or maybe the next play is the black captain then tackles the black running back in a really hard way, right? And they're just showing that they're stepping up and they're holding their own groups accountable. And it's this moment where things just change, the dynamics change. Anyways, why am I telling this whole story? It had a profound impact on me. They form a friendship to the end of time. It reminds me a lot of us, even though we didn't play football together.
But I am a huge football fan, and the Cowboys play at 3:45, and that's my team.
Okay.
So just be mindful of time, baby.
We will be mindful of time.
I spend all my Sundays watching the NFL.
My point is, this was a very moving movie for me as a white person.
And right? You told it in a moving manner, and that's cool.
Listen, but I went and checked. I had to, like, in thinking about this, I had to check. It was directed by an Israeli American.
Mm-hmm.
He created this piece that made an impact. I looked at Hotel Rwanda, okay, because it's another one that had a major impact. The director and co-writer of the script was an Irish American who went through the Troubles, right? These are people who didn't experience either of these things, but each of them had some relationship, some way to touch the humanity of the story. And through that common humanity, we're able to tell it in a way that, and hopefully I know in the Hotel Rwanda, there was interviews with Mr. I forget what his name is, the hotel.
Would have been this character played by Don Cheadle.
Correct. Yeah. So I know that they gained context there. My point is, I just feel there is a way to touch each other's experience and channel that in a creative endeavor in a way that can be contextualized, and that the people who are going to see that.
I say it depends on the subject. It depends on the subject. Would you trust this Israeli American to make a movie about black on black love? No. Because when have you experienced black on black love? Never. What if a black American artist were to step up and create a memorial and to Jewish Holocaust survivors here in the United States because they were so moved by the story? How did that wrestle and settle in your heart?
Yeah, and so that's why I mean, clearly I resonate with some of what Glenn Loury and John McWhorter said, because I shared something, you asked me a similar kind of question in a previous conversation. So in reflecting on this video, I asked myself an even more specific question. I asked, what if someone else who wasn't Jewish did the Schindler's List movie? And I wouldn't care, personally. Now, Spielberg happens to be a pretty amazing director, so he did it in a very compelling way, and obviously he feels an ownership of that story, and he's gone on to do many things since in that area, recording actual people's stories, right? But if someone who wasn't Jewish created a kind of monument, or an expression, a symbol to had a creative expression of the telling of the story of the Holocaust that was poignant and meaningful and captured the essence of the feelings about it, I would just applaud I would just enjoy and appreciate the creation. I honestly, personally wouldn't think about who the creator was, which was kind of one of the questions they elevated, right?
And that's you,
together,
but what about the Jewish community?
I do think a good number of people would feel the same way I would feel, which is some action, an action to elevate the story by someone who's non-Jewish would be appreciated because, in some sense, you kind of want non-Jews to elevate it, right?
By the way, just so we get to set the scene, I categorically disagree with you, but go ahead.
Yeah. And the reason you kind of want that is because you want people to take up the importance of your story. It's the same reason that the Black community might want allies. It's for me, where it comes from, part of what I see the value in is it relates to when you say, where does responsibility lie? Responsibility lies very much in your mind with the white community. And so if responsibility lies in the white community to push forward changes of attitudes and ultimately policies, what are the tools that they can and will and should use to move forward change, right? And one area is the area of creativity and creative expression. In fact, that's some of the most impactful. Schindler's List made a difference because it was creative. It wasn't someone getting up on a pedestal at a podium and just sermonizing, right? It was something that through entertainment could capture people's hearts in a different way. So anyways, those are some of the thoughts that I feel. Again, I don't really know. I can't think of an example where I would be able to know how people in the Jewish community would feel about someone who's non-Jewish doing something like the Schindler's List. But I know how I feel, and my sense is some broad part of the community would feel similarly, while some would critique.
So I disagree with you. I personally feel that the Jewish community would feel a sense of ownership of that narrative and its telling and the ways in which that telling is imparted to the world. So I think even though they could be a minority voice, although I don't believe they would be a minority voice, I think it'd be a loud minority voice of people who would say, if you're going to create some sort of moving memorial to Holocaust survivors living in the United States, which is the scenario that I presented, it needs to be done by a Jewish person. And because we need to tell and contextualize our stories. Let's harken back to the original topic of discussion, the Harriet Tubman Monument in Philadelphia, with such a public commission. That is a huge opportunity for an African-American artist to be recognized and known. And like I said, just the optics of the situation would bear, it would be nice for it to go to an African-American artist, especially since in that medium, and I say the medium of sculpture, that we have not necessarily been the most patronized or taken up or given that opportunity. So for me, I'm coming from the perspective of an opportunity, right, to really launch and catapult a person's career.
So, two questions. If to put the opportunity aside for a moment, because that seems to be a big piece for you, and I understand that piece. So let's just put it aside for a moment. If there was a process, let's say that this process, and again, I don't know what they did in Philadelphia, but let's say that this process was that people anonymously submit ideas for creations of this statue, and that the people making the decision were some sort of well-rounded, including ample participation from Black members of Philadelphia, had to come together and critique, discuss, decide on which one most represented what they wanted to get across about the story of Harriet Tubman, right? And that what struck people was one that was created by a white person.
So I disagree. So I'm going to stop you right here because I already disagree with your premise when you
What's the
use the
premise?
word anonymous, because anonymous would not have been my process.
Thank you for watching this episode of Healing Race, and stay with us for a scene from our next video.
If you want to see more conversations like the one you just watched, please subscribe to our channel, share this video with friends and family, and like and comment on the video below.
If you'd like to be a guest on one of our episodes and have an open, real conversation about race, email us at guests@healingraceshow.com.
And if there are topics you think we should cover, we'd love to hear them. So please email your ideas to topics@healingraceshow.com.
As always, thanks for your support. We look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Now, here's a scene from our next Healing Race. There is a point in time where, you know, in a empathetic way, in a patient way even, I feel the need to say the past is the past. Yes, there are current, like you brought up the article, there are still people trying to spout these narratives about Jewish people, but we still live in a different world, and we're not in the Holocaust right now. And I want to say, listen, I will probably cry every time I tell my grandparents' story. I'm not saying to get rid of your, we got to be these like unemotional people who don't feel connection to history and to story. But I also know that I at least in my own sense, in my own right, and for the rest of my Jewish community, I don't want to be stuck in that. I don't want us to be stuck in.
People are walking into synagogues and shooting them up. You're still stuck in it.
There are still
synagogues and shooting them up just because you're Jewish.
True, but there is an importance in acknowledging the difference of degree, right?
I'll accept that.
We're not in Egypt. We're not in Germany. These things still happen, and there's still threats. I'm not going to disown that. Nor would I do it, of course, for the Black community, because I'm not Black, first of all, so I don't experience it. But even in understanding some of the parallels, I would never discount the threats that still exist. I do think that there still is validity to the encouragement that I feel John McWhorter is trying to give of don't live in that space. I feel like that's what he's trying to say. Don't live in that space. Yeah, at certain points, come to remember that, the way we were persecuted in Egypt, come to remember that. Yes, but don't have this be a mantra that you carry around with yourself on a regular basis.
And what I'm saying is, at the same time, you go tell the bigot the same goddamn thing. Don't live in the space of hatred. Don't live in the space that Jews are your problem. Fine, I accept what you're trying to say. Say it, baby. But then you go tell that motherfucker the same goddamn thing. And then there we go. To watch the rest of that episode, go ahead and click the video below me.
To see a different compelling Healing Race episode, you can click the video below me. We look forward to seeing you in the next video.